When people talk about betrayal, they picture one big moment, someone shouting, someone walking away. Mine wasn't like that. It happened slowly, word by word, year by year. Every time my sister spoke for me instead of to me. Every time she smiled at a table full of people and turned my silence into proof that I didn't belong there. I kept telling myself it was family, that blood meant something. So I stayed quiet. I worked harder. I let her win, thinking someday she'd see I wasn't her enemy. But the day she looked me in the eye and said, "You should have stayed where you fell," something in me stopped breaking and started hardening. That was the moment I knew. I would never beg to be seen again. And the people who built their peace on my silence, they had no idea how close the sky already was. Texas heat has a way of pressing down on you, like it's trying to flatten the air out of your lungs. The day I came home, the sky shimmered white, and the asphalt outside the church looked like it might melt. Inside, the air conditioning couldn't hide the smell of lilies or the perfume that didn't belong to grief. The church was beautiful, too beautiful. White walls, gold fixtures, tall glass windows catching every drop of light. It didn't look like a place to say goodbye. It looked like a place where people came to make statements. I slid into a pew near the back, the wood polished and cold against my palms. I could feel sweat sticking to my shirt, but it wasn't the heat that made me uncomfortable. It was the silence, that polite, heavy kind that fills a room when everyone knows exactly who shouldn't be there. When I looked up, I realized the person standing behind the podium wasn't the priest. It was Vivienne. Her voice carried through the hall, smooth, steady, rehearsed. She spoke of legacy, of vision, of ambition, words that didn't sound like mourning at all. She mentioned our mother's name the way someone might say the title of a company. Each sentence was perfectly timed for applause, and the audience gave it to her, gentle and orderly, as if she'd just closed a deal. I sat still. My hands tightened around the small wooden box I'd carried halfway across the country. It was all I had left of the woman we were supposed to be burying. Though looking around, I wasn't sure anyone here remembered her that way. To them, she was a story, a name in a business article. To me, she was the one who used to keep her coffee warm on the old kitchen stove, humming to herself when she thought no one was listening. When the last hymn faded, Vivienne stepped down from the altar. People gathered to compliment her on the eulogy, as if she'd given a keynote speech. Her black dress shimmered under the lights. Even grief looked good on her. When she finally reached me, I smelled the perfume before I saw her face. She smiled, the way you do when there's a camera nearby. "You made it. I wasn't sure you would." I didn't answer. She tilted her head, the same way she used to when she wanted to remind me she was in control. "Mom always hoped you'd learn what it means to grow up." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was exactly what I expected her to say. I'd spent years away, years trying to believe distance could dissolve resentment. But standing there, I realized distance doesn't change family. It just makes their words echo louder when you finally have to hear them again. Around us, the guests began to file out. Vivienne stayed perfectly poised, shaking hands, smiling, thanking everyone for coming as if this were one of her charity galas. When she finished, she walked to the table near the exit where a neat stack of envelopes waited. "For everyone involved in the estate," she announced, her tone sweet but sharp enough to cut. One by one, people approached to collect their envelopes, their condolences suddenly more genuine once there was something to take home. I stayed where I was until she called me forward. When I reached out my hand, she slipped a small velvet pouch into it instead of an envelope. "This is yours," she said quietly, though not quietly enough to stop nearby ears from catching every word. "Mom wanted you to have it. The rest, I'll handle." Inside the pouch was a silver pendant shaped like a pair of wings. It was warm from the heat, or maybe from my hand. The kind of thing that used to hang from her neck when she'd watch me leave for training, when she still believed both of us could fly in our own ways. Vivienne's gaze dropped to the pendant and then back to me. "Try not to get too attached," she murmured. Some of us have to live in the real world. I looked at her then. The perfect makeup, the pressed dress, the confidence she wore like armor, and I realized she believed that what I'd chosen, the life I'd built, was just an illusion. She didn't know that the real world isn't built from titles or applause. It's built from what you survive. I didn't answer her. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like starting a war. And this wasn't the place for it. Not yet. I just closed my fingers around the pendant until the edges bit into my palm. When she turned away, photographers snapped one last photo of her with the priest, smiling like she'd planned the whole day to perfection. I slipped out the side door, the sunlight blinding, the pavement so hot it made the air waver. For a long moment, I just stood there, listening to the hum of traffic, the faint sound of laughter from inside the church. My throat felt tight, and not from grief. I'd thought coming home would bring some kind of peace, a sense of ending, but all I felt was distance between who I was and who they believed me to be. I looked down at the pendant again. The wings caught the light, throwing a flash of silver across my wrist. I saw my reflection warped in the metal, small, distorted, unsteady. Maybe that's what coming home does. It shows you the shape of who you've become against the shadow of who they still think you are. I slipped the pendant around my neck. It felt heavy, like it carried more than memory, like it was reminding me that no matter how long I stayed gone, I could never really land here again. Somewhere inside, a door finally shut. I didn't know what would happen next, only that this time, I wouldn't be the quiet one standing in the back. 2 weeks passed before the phone rang. I knew that number the moment I saw it, though I hadn't saved it in years. Vivian's voice came through steady, polished, wrapped in courtesy like a blade sheathed in silk. She said she wanted to talk about the company, about the estate, about what was best for the family. I told myself I wouldn't go, but she had a way of arranging the world so that refusal never really sounded like an option. So, 2 days later, I found myself walking down the jet bridge at Ted Stevens Airport in Anchorage, boarding a plane I didn't want to be on. The sky outside was the color of slate, and the air carried that frozen silence that always came before a storm. Vivian had booked first class. Of course. 2 seats, side by side. She was already there when I arrived, immaculate, composed, sipping champagne like she'd been born on the higher end of altitude. I sat down beside her, my body still cold from the Alaskan air. For a while, neither of us spoke. The engines began to hum, the plane eased back from the gate, and her perfume settled into the air like expensive smoke. Then, without looking at me, she said softly, as if sharing a secret she'd been dying to tell, that she'd saved my career once. I turned to her. Saved? She smiled, eyes still fixed ahead, and said that back in 2018, during the investigation, she'd helped me by providing a statement, her words, confirming that my drone test had only suffered a minor adjustment issue. She even quoted the phrase, rolling it on her tongue like it was harmless. The cabin lights flickered briefly, and my pulse kicked hard against my ribs. That phrase, adjustment issue, had never been public. It was buried in the classified report, the one only the board and the investigation committee had access to. I forced my voice to stay calm, though my throat had turned dry. Who gave you permission to submit anything? Vivian laughed, the kind of laugh that was too soft to sound human. She finally turned toward me, wine glass in hand, her nails catching the light. She said she'd done it to protect the family name, that she couldn't let my mistake ruin what our parents had built. Then she leaned back and asked, almost casually, if I'd ever considered how much trouble she'd saved me from. I wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't move. The anger was too old, too familiar, and somehow it felt rehearsed. This wasn't a new conversation. It was the one I'd been avoiding since the day everything collapsed. My mind went back to the report, to the blank line under pilot error, to the way I'd signed my name next to a truth I didn't cause but couldn't disprove. Now I knew why the evidence had vanished, why the systems engineer's logs never resurfaced. My sister hadn't been saving me. She'd been erasing me. I swallowed hard, staring at the small reflection of the cabin lights on the window. Outside, snow drifted past in thin, steady lines. I asked her, slowly, why Mother hadn't known. Vivian shrugged, said Mom had been too ill then, that some burdens don't need to be shared with dying people. That was the first time in my life I wanted to strike her. But I didn't move. I just sat there, my fingers wrapped so tightly around the pendant at my throat that the edges left marks in my skin. Vivian tilted her glass, the red wine catching the overhead light like blood underwater. She looked pleased with herself, radiant even, as if she'd just proven something. She always did enjoy the feeling of control. The captain's voice broke through the quiet. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. Weather looks clear ahead, 6 hours to Dallas. Smooth skies all the way. Smooth skies. That phrase made my chest tighten. I'd learned long ago that smooth skies was what people said when they wanted others to stop worrying. In flight school, the instructors taught us something different, that calm air was only a disguise for turbulence forming above it. The body of the plane knows before the instruments do. The engines started to deepen in pitch as we accelerated. Vivian closed her eyes, reclined her seat. Content. I listened. I'd always trusted the sound of metal more than the sound of people. There it was again, that faint, uneven vibration underfoot. Most passengers would never notice. But I did. It was the kind of hitch that didn't belong in a Boeing. Not dangerous yet, but not right either. Like a whisper between gears, a heartbeat that had lost its rhythm. I pressed my thumb against the silver wings around my neck, half out of habit, half out of instinct. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe, like every other time in my life, the warning had come too early for anyone to believe me. Vivian opened one eye, sensing my attention somewhere else. She smirked, lazy and confident, and said I looked nervous. I told her it wasn't nerves, it was awareness. She laughed again, said that awareness was what got me into trouble the last time. She leaned closer, her tone soft but slicing. You should learn when to stop listening to ghosts. I stared out the window, toward the wing lights cutting through the dark. The hum of the engines blended with her voice until I couldn't tell which one I hated more. The seatbelt sign went off. The flight attendants began their slow ballet up the aisle, serving drinks, collecting trays. Vivian ordered another round. I refused one. She didn't like that. She never liked when I refused anything she offered. As the plane leveled, the pressure in my ears adjusted. For a moment, everything went still. Then I felt it again, a second tremor, deeper this time, crawling up from the floor to the seat frame. Vivian didn't notice. Or maybe she did, and chose not to. She was still talking, about stock shares, about her next project, about how we could restore the family image. The way she said we made me want to laugh. I looked down at my hands resting on my lap. The light from the cabin turned them pale. I remembered how those same hands once held a control stick, steady through turbulence. No one thought I'd survive. I'd done harder things than listen to her. But as the engines shifted pitch again, that slight metallic grind returning, I knew something was wrong, not just with the aircraft, but with everything that had brought us here. Vivian's world ran on polish and denial. Mine had been built on instinct, and right now, instinct was screaming. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. Too calm, too measured. We're just going to adjust our altitude to find a smoother path ahead. I closed my eyes. I knew that tone. I'd used it myself once, trying to keep a classroom of cadets calm when a training jet lost its hydraulics. Smooth path, stable weather, minor adjustments, all the same vocabulary for danger dressed in comfort. Beside me, Vivian lifted her glass, completely unbothered. She smiled at the stewardess and said, "Turbulence makes the flight memorable, don't you think?" I didn't answer. I was busy counting seconds between the vibrations, feeling the air pressure change in my chest. 6 hours, the pilot had said. I didn't believe him, because when the sky shifts like that, when metal starts to murmur under your feet, you learn the truth. Smooth skies are just storms that haven't found you yet. 3 hours into the flight, the light outside the cabin windows had turned the color of wet ash. The sun was sinking behind a bank of clouds, the last streak of gold slipping away like it couldn't bear to watch what came next. Vivian had grown restless in her seat. She unbuttoned her jacket, draped it over her knees, and smiled at the flight attendant passing by. Her voice was light, social, practiced. She said she flew often enough to know every airline worth trusting. The attendant laughed, too politely, and moved on. I slipped on my headphones, pretending to watch a movie, but the sound coming from outside began to push through the music. A faint whine, steady, drawn out, like metal rubbing against itself. It wasn't the low hum of engines I'd grown used to all my life. This had a strain to it, a pitch that didn't belong. I took off the headphones. The noise deepened. The cabin trembled, almost imperceptibly at first. Then with a rhythm that set my teeth on edge, something inside the airframe was working harder than it should. Vivian leaned closer, still smiling, unaware of anything beyond her own reflection in the screen ahead. She raised her glass of wine, savoring herself in the dim blue light. I didn't say a word yet. I tilted my head. Listening. Old habits never leave you. That wasn't air resistance. That was friction. I caught the attention of a nearby attendant, a young woman who looked too calm for how new she probably was. When she bent slightly toward me, I kept my voice low. "Is the cockpit reporting any oil pressure fluctuations?" She blinked. "Oil pressure?" I'll check with the crew." Before she could move, Vivian laughed softly, as if I'd just told a joke. "Relax, Cal. You forget this isn't one of your training missions. It's a civilian flight." I ignored her. The tremor beneath my feet had grown sharper, a vibration like a pulse, metal straining under its own weight. The plane shuddered once, hard enough that the overhead compartments rattled. Vivian gasped as her wine splashed across her dress. She hissed for the flight attendant again, tapping the service button with a manicured nail. "A little turbulence, and no one can keep a glass upright. I swear, standards have fallen." Her voice grated against the noise rising from the floor. Then it came, an unfamiliar clipped voice through the speaker system. "The co-pilot, ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor issue with the right engine. Please remain seated and fasten your seat belts." The calm in his tone wasn't real. To anyone who's ever flown, you can hear the difference between control and panic pretending not to be. A few passengers gasped. Others turned to whisper. The attendant reappeared, face pale now, her hands clasped tightly. Vivian frowned, annoyed at the disturbance. "Right engine." My stomach sank. I looked straight at her. "The right side," I murmured. "That's where the failure was on the 2018 drone test." Her eyes flickered, just for a second, then darted away toward the window. Denial, fast and instinctive. The plane gave another hard jolt. Overhead, a few bins popped open. Someone screamed. Too early. More from fear than pain. Vivian wiped her dress with a napkin, muttering about compensation forms, about service quality, about how this was unacceptable. I didn't answer. I was listening again. The hum had changed pitch, deeper now, slower, the sound of a turbine losing rhythm. Then the attendant was back. This time, not calm at all. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "The co-pilot needs technical support. The autopilot system isn't responding." Everything in me went still. AI flight system. It was a name that had haunted every nightmare since the hearing. The very technology I'd trained on. The system that had cost me my record, my career, and almost my sanity. I turned toward Vivian. She was blotting her dress with the white napkin, pretending not to hear. Her hands trembled just slightly. So slightly she might have thought I wouldn't notice. But I did. She knew. I pressed my palms together, trying to steady the pounding in my chest. The irony of it all, the same design, the same flaw, the same name, now thousands of feet above the ground. And sitting next to me, the person who had funded it, buried the truth, and walked away spotless. Vivian broke the silence first, her voice tight but controlled. "These things happen," she said. Just a small error. They'll reset the system. I stared ahead at the seat in front of me. The low hum had become a grinding moan. Not a reset, a failure cascade. I should have said something to the crew. Should have stood up right then. But part of me hesitated. Not from fear of flying, but from the old exhaustion of never being believed. The weight of all those years of people smiling, nodding, calling me dramatic. I clenched my jaw. Not this time. Vivian glanced over, saw my expression, and whispered, "You're not going to make a scene, are you?" The seatbelt sign flashed again overhead. The captain's voice, calm and detached, came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Our crew is addressing a technical irregularity. There is no immediate danger. No immediate danger." Words meant to soothe. To me, they meant something else entirely. Stall time. The lights flickered. The hum faltered. The tremor deepened until it felt like the plane itself had started to breathe unevenly. Vivian straightened, suddenly pale. She looked toward the aisle, as if expecting someone to appear with answers. The attendant was whispering urgently into the interphone, the color gone from her face, and just like that, I knew. The autopilot wasn't coming back. Vivian turned to me again, panic finally bleeding through the polish. "What's happening?" I kept my eyes on the window. The clouds outside had gone from gray to almost black. The wingtip lights blinked through the mist, once, twice, then disappeared into the thickening dark. Something inside me steadied. The same instinct that had once lifted my hands onto a control stick now told me to stay still, to wait. Because when the sky trembles like this, it isn't asking for noise. It's warning you that everything you thought you'd buried is about to rise. I didn't answer her question. I didn't need to. Outside, lightning flashed far ahead, cutting through the clouds. For an instant, the reflection in the window showed both of our faces, hers wide-eyed, mine calm, resolved. The cabin shuddered again. People started praying, whispering, holding hands. Vivian pressed her palm to the armrest, muttering about calling the flight crew. I sat back, the pendant at my throat cool against my skin, and thought of the words she'd said weeks ago about living in the real world. The real world was right here, 37,000 feet above the Rockies, and it was about to demand payment. The right engine roared once, coughed, and fell silent. The lights flickered off, then on again. Someone screamed. The intercom cracked with static, and all I could think, through the ringing in my ears and the shaking floor, was that maybe justice doesn't fall from the sky. It climbs out of it. Because tonight, the sky wasn't still anymore. It was remembering. The sound didn't come like thunder. It came like betrayal, sharp, sudden, final. A bang from the right wing cracked through the air so loud it felt like the cabin itself flinched. The floor kicked beneath my feet, a deep metallic groan shuddering through the plane. The lights flashed red, and within seconds, the aisle filled with shouts. Luggage rattled in the overhead bins. A child screamed. Someone prayed. The smell of burning oil crept in fast, cutting through the recycled air. I knew that smell. It wasn't turbulence. It was death circling. Vivian was still yelling at the flight attendant, her voice slicing through the panic. "Somebody do something! I didn't pay for first class to die in it!" The plane jolted again, sending her drink across the seatback. Passengers grabbed at their belts, at each other, at nothing. I unbuckled mine. She turned on me, eyes wide with disbelief. "Sit down! Callista! You're losing it!" I looked her dead in the eye. No, I've never been more awake. A thin man 2 rows behind reached forward, clutching his daughter's shoulders. His voice trembled. Are you a pilot?" I nodded once. "Used to be." He didn't hesitate. "Please, save us." I moved into the aisle, the world tilting under my feet. A flight attendant blocked my path, her face pale beneath the emergency lights. "Ma'am, passengers aren't allowed. If I don't go in there, no one will be allowed to do anything again." She froze. My fingers found the worn edges of my old ID in my pocket. I held it out. The last piece of proof I still existed somewhere inside the system that had erased me. United States Air Force, multi-engine certified, let me through. Her eyes flicked between my face and the ID, then back again. Something in her expression changed. She released the latch. The smell hit me first when I stepped into the cockpit. Burned circuits and ozone. The captain was slumped against the console, mask half off, his skin gray. The co-pilot fought to breathe through his own mask, sweat pouring down his temple. He looked at me, desperate. The AI's locked. It's stuck in test mode. I can't shut it off. Switch to manual, I said. He shook his head, panic in every muscle. It won't respond. I crouched low, scanning the display, and there it was, burned into my memory before I even read it. The blue interface, the same command strings I'd once memorized line by line. AIFS V2.1, the same system that had ended my career. My stomach twisted. I saw every piece click into place. The crash in 2018, the missing data logs, the false report signed in my name. It had never been pilot error. It was software. And Vivian had buried it because she'd funded it. Hand me the controls, I said. He hesitated. You're not authorized. Do you want to land this plane or fall out of the sky? For a second, neither of us breathed. Then he nodded. I grabbed the yoke, fingers wrapping around the cool metal. It shook like a heartbeat. Mayday. This is Frontier Sky 914. Dual engine failure over the Rockies. Requesting emergency vector. Static crackled. Then a voice from air traffic control. Clipped but steady. Copy Mayday. Confirm altitude. 28,000 and dropping fast. One sheer 70 knots. The voice replied. Suggest diverting to Colorado Springs. The nose dipped. We lost 3,000 feet in less than 10 seconds. My neck snapped forward. The seatbelt dug into my ribs. I fought the stick with both hands, arms trembling under the force. Behind me, the sound of chaos blurred together. Cries, prayers, Vivian's voice cutting through them all. What are you doing? Are you trying to kill us? I didn't look back. You don't get it, I said quietly. It's not me killing anyone. It's your investment. The warning lights screamed across the console. Hydraulic pressure, critical, manual only. I felt the blood drain from my face. The co-pilot looked at me like a man seeing the end. We lost hydraulics. You can't land a 777 without hydraulics. Watch me. He swallowed hard and held his side of the control steady. I adjusted the trim manually, trying to compensate for the dead weight of the right engine. The plane groaned in protest. Outside, lightning spidered across the clouds. The turbulence slammed us sideways, and Vivian's body hit the cabin wall with a dull thud. I leveled us out again, the yoke heavy as stone in my hands. Every move was muscle memory, the kind they'd drilled into us through repetition and pain. This wasn't simulation anymore. This was pure instinct. We were descending toward the storm wall. The altimeter spun, digits blurring. Colorado Springs Tower, Frontier Sky 914, still descending, requesting clear runway and emergency cruise. Tower voice crackled back. Confirm manual control, manual only. I answered. Say again? I gritted my teeth. Manual? Only! The co-pilot's voice trembled beside me. If you're off by even a degree, then we'll die fast. I pushed the throttle back, cutting power to stabilize the drag, guiding the plane's nose just enough to catch smoother air. Sweat trickled into my eyes. My arms burned. Through the static, a weak voice from the cabin phone. It was Vivian again, somewhere behind the door. Callista, stop this! You'll destroy everything! Everything's already broken, I said. The AI system began flashing red. Connection error. Reconnect to base server. I froze. Red blinked again. The system wasn't just failing, it was trying to reconnect. Remote access. They were watching this flight in real time, trying to override me. A surge of anger hit me hard and clean. They were going to erase this too, turn it into another unexplained malfunction. Not this time. I reached for the panel, found the main link cable under the avionics console, and yanked it free. Sparks jumped, burning across my knuckles. I snapped the connector off and threw it to the floor. The lights flickered once, then went dark. Silence. No automation, no AI, no ghost in the machine. Just the sound of my own breath and the weight of 100 tons of metal in my hands. The co-pilot whispered, awed and terrified. "We're flying blind." "No," I said. "We're flying human." I pressed the comm button. "Tower, this is Frontier Sky 914. Autopilot disabled. Manual vector confirmed. I need a clear runway and emergency personnel." "Copy, 914. You are clear to approach on vector 170. Winds at 65 cross." "Roger that." The turbulence tossed us again. Harder this time. The plane's frame rattled like bones shaking in a tin coffin. I fought to steady the descent. The co-pilot stared at me. "You've done this before, haven't you?" "Once," I said. "Only once." The intercom crackled again. The tower's voice barely audible over the wind. "You're coming in too steep. Adjust pitch 5 degrees." I tightened my grip. Couldn't. If I eased up now, we'd stall. Instead, I whispered the words to myself, the same mantra I'd used every time fear tried to claw through focus. "We're going to glide it in." At 27,000 feet and falling, we crossed into a layer of open sky between storms. The horizon flashed white. The Rockies rolled beneath us like frozen waves. Behind me, someone sobbed. Somewhere. Vivian was silent for the first time in her life. My arms burned as I held the yoke steady. The co-pilot's voice broke the quiet. "You're insane. Maybe. But you'll live to call me that. For the next 30 minutes. I kept us level by feel alone. The shift of gravity in my gut. The hum of wind on metal. The instruments were half dead. The AI gutted. The hydraulics gone. But I was still there. And as long as I was breathing, this plane would not fall. The radio hissed. The tower's voice came back one final time, calm but strained. "Frontier Sky 914, Colorado Springs in sight. You are clear to land. Godspeed." I exhaled slowly. The lights of the runway glimmered ahead, faint but steady through the storm haze. I turned slightly to the co-pilot. "Hold on. This is going to hurt." And then I began the descent. The fuselage was shaking like something alive, like it wanted to tear itself in half. The yoke fought me with every ounce of force it had left. I bit down so hard my lips split, tasting blood and metal. Behind me, the cabin dissolved into chaos. Screams, prayers, the sound of luggage breaking free. Over all of it, Vivian's voice cut through like glass. She was shouting into the satellite phone, her words snapping one after another. "I'll sue this airline. Do you hear me? I'm an investor. They can't." Her voice broke off mid-sentence when a man's shout rose from the cabin. "For God's sake, shut up and let her fly!" For the first time in my life, Vivian fell silent. The entire cabin seemed to lean forward, their collective will pressing toward the cockpit door. They understood what she didn't. This was survival now, not status. Outside, the night swallowed everything. The clouds churned black and bruised, lightning cutting sideways across the sky. Every flash lit up the cracked paint on the wing. The plane lurched again, dropping what felt like 100 feet in a single breath. "Wind shear, left side!" the co-pilot yelled, his voice shaking. "I see it." I rolled the yoke hard right, feeling the entire plane twist under my hands. The pressure pushed against my shoulders, every nerve burning as I forced the aircraft into a controlled turn. The turbulence slammed back, but the nose steadied. Someone vomited behind me. Somewhere else. A baby screamed, that high, thin sound cutting right through the noise. For half a second, my mother's voice slipped into my head, so clear it felt like she was in the seat beside me. "You don't need them to believe you. Callista, you just need to know you're right." I breathed out slow through my nose and adjusted the pitch. 5 degrees. Just 5. I turned the heading to 230, angling for smoother air. "Hold steady," I said to the co-pilot. "Winds shifting in 40 seconds. He didn't ask how I knew. He just nodded, trusting me the way a drowning man trusts the one holding him above water. Through the windshield, far below the rolling darkness, a flicker of light broke through the snow. A runway, faint and half-buried. I pointed toward it. There, an old military strip. We're going down there. The control panel blared a new warning. Auto brake fail, manual landing required. I almost laughed, a sound that cracked in my throat. Of course it is. The altimeter spun down past 10,000, then 9. The air was thinner, colder, biting at my lungs. The co-pilot's breath came fast beside me. "We're too heavy. We'll overshoot the runway. Dump the fuel," I said. "We only need to live, not to save the company money." He hesitated, then opened the valves. A hiss filled the air. The smell of jet fuel burned sharp in the back of my throat. The red and amber lights reflected off the glass, painting the cockpit in warning colors. Everything looked like fire. Behind us, Vivian had gone quiet. I didn't have to turn around to feel her eyes on me. It wasn't anger anymore. It was fear, and something else. Recognition. Her voice came soft, like someone talking to a stranger. "You actually know what you're doing, don't you?" Always did. I lowered the landing gear. The vibration through the yoke nearly tore my arms apart. Every joint in the plane screamed with us. The ground lights grew closer, patches of white runway against the dark. Crosswinds were brutal, throwing the tail left and right. The co-pilot shouted something I didn't hear. My world had shrunk to the weight of the controls in my hands, the muscle memory in my shoulders, and the voice in my head counting down distance like a prayer. 300 feet, 200. When the wheels hit, the impact rattled through my spine. Metal scraped against ice, sparks bursting from the undercarriage. The sound was deafening, screams mixed with the roar of the wind, with the grinding of steel fighting gravity. I pulled the yoke toward me with everything I had left. My arms burned. My teeth clenched so hard I felt something crack. The aircraft skidded sideways, smoke rising from the landing gear. For one sickening second, I thought we'd flip. Then the noise changed, from tearing to sliding, from chaos to friction. The plane slowed, dragging across the ice until it stopped with a violent shudder. We were still upright. For a moment, there was nothing, no sound, no breath, just the faint hiss of cooling metal. Then sobs broke out, soft at first, then louder, until the cabin was full of the sound of life, realizing it still existed. I sat there, frozen. My hands wouldn't release the yoke. My pulse thudded in my ears. We stopped. The co-pilot whispered, "My God, we actually stopped." I nodded, breath shaking. "We're down." He turned to me, tears streaking through the soot on his face. "You saved them." "No, I just brought them home." I stood, muscles trembling, and opened the cockpit door. Smoke filled the cabin, pale against the emergency lights. People were crying, holding each other, praying into the backs of their hands. The smell of fuel and fear clung to everything. Vivian was still seated, hair tangled, eyes wide. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked human, terrified, unguarded. When she saw me, her lips trembled. You really did it." I met her gaze. "No one wants to fly through hell, Vivian. But if you have to, you'd better know the way back." Outside, the blizzard was easing. Snowflakes drifted in the pale glow of the rescue lights, swirling in slow motion like ash falling from the sky. When I stepped onto the runway, the cold hit me so hard I could barely feel my fingers. Emergency vehicles lined the tarmac, their red strobes flashing across the broken surface of the jet. 300 people climbed out behind me, one by one, dazed but breathing. The co-pilot came to stand beside me, his voice rough. "You realize what you just did? You brought 300 people down in a dead stick landing." I looked at the plane, smoke still curling from the wing. The metal was dented, scarred, alive. It wasn't heroism. It was instinct, the kind that burns itself into you so deep you forget it's there until the moment you need it. We watched the paramedics move through the snow, wrapping blankets around passengers, ushering them toward buses waiting in the distance. The chaos was quiet now, controlled, survivable. I turned back toward the open cabin door. Vivienne was still sitting in her seat, staring out at me through the window, her expression unreadable. Somewhere beneath the fear, I thought I saw shame, or maybe the beginning of it. I didn't wait to find out. As the rescue crews swarmed the wreck, I whispered the only thing that made sense anymore. We landed. The sky above was black and silent, the storm finally spent. But I knew better than to think it was over. Storms don't end when you touch the ground. They just change shape, and the next one, the one waiting for me on the ground, was already building, slow and inevitable, in the form of my sister's lies and the headlines that would follow. For now, though, I let the snow sting my face and the wind fill the hollow inside me. I'd brought them home, and somewhere between the fire and the silence, the sky had given me back my voice. When the door finally opened, the cold rushed in so sharp it felt like the world reminding me I was still alive. Flashing lights painted the cabin in bursts of red and white. The smell of fuel mixed with burned plastic, and the air was filled with the sound of coughing, crying, and the soft hiss of metal cooling down. I stood there, still gripping the broken yoke, my body shaking from the fight that had kept us in the sky. Liam, the co-pilot, laid a hand on my shoulder. "You pulled us out of death," he whispered. I managed a hollow breath. Maybe, but I'm not sure I'll survive what's next. Outside, Vivienne was already in front of cameras. Her coat was half burned, her lipstick gone, but she still knew how to find the light. The flight encountered a minor technical issue, she told the reporters. Fortunately, the automated system responded just in time. Her voice carried over the chaos. Smooth, rehearsed, corporate. The same voice she'd used at board meetings, at family dinners, at my mother's funeral. She had already started rewriting the story before the wreckage had even cooled. They took me to a military hospital near Colorado Springs. The corridors smelled of antiseptic and snow, while a nurse wrapped my burned palms. An FAA investigator walked in, papers in hand. "We'll need your statement for Washington," he said. "Emergency session, tomorrow morning." When he left, I saw my mother's silver pendant on the bedside table. The chain had snapped. The clasp cracked open. Inside the hinge was something dark, a small microchip, engraved with faint letters, EM 2018. I slid it into the tablet at my bedside. The screen flickered, then came alive with old data, simulation files, system logs, a video of the drone test that had destroyed my career. I watched the autopilot algorithm loop, glitch, and crash. Exactly the same failure pattern that had taken down tonight's flight. Vivienne hadn't just funded the system that ruined me. She'd reused it, branded it under a new name, and sold it for profit. My hands shook as I sent the files to Helen Marks, my former military lawyer. She called within minutes, voice clipped, sharp. "If that's real," she said, "you're not just vindicated, you're going to bury her." I looked out the window. The wreck of the 777 still sat out on the frozen runway, surrounded by lights. "No," I said quietly. "I just want the truth to land." By dawn, my name was everywhere. Heroic ex-pilot saves 300 lives. Unauthorized takeover raises legal questions. The networks couldn't decide if I was a savior or a liability. Then Vivienne appeared on national television, perfectly composed, soft-spoken. She called me brave, said she was proud, then added that I'd struggled to reintegrate after deployment, that I'd always been impulsive. The word Syria left her lips like a weapon. I froze. That record was sealed. Only military medical staff had access to it. She'd broken into my classified file to paint me as unstable. Helen called again, her tone colder than before. "She's fabricating a mental health narrative. But we have something better. The footage from the chip. Prepare for the hearing." I didn't answer. I was staring at the muted television, watching Vivienne's image on the screen. She was smiling, serene, unbothered. The audience clapped. They didn't see the cost of that calm, the bodies it was built on, the truth buried underneath. The nurse came back to check my pulse. I told her I was fine, even though my heart was pounding like I was still in free fall. I reached for the pendant, closing it in my fist until I felt the metal bite my skin. Outside the window, the snow was still falling, soft, relentless, covering everything it touched. The wreck lights flickered through the fog like fading stars. I whispered to the glass, half to myself. The sky doesn't lie. Vivienne, people do. My phone buzzed again. Helen had texted. This evidence could change everything. I typed back. Then let's make it land. The storm was gone, but I could still feel the turbulence in my chest. For the first time since the crash, I wasn't afraid of it. I'd spent my life trying to survive other people's narratives. Now I had one of my own. And this time, it was the truth that was about to take off. 3 days later, I was summoned to Washington, D.C. The hearing room was blindingly white, every surface polished, the kind of place designed to make people forget they were human. A long table stretched before me, lined with 4 FAA officials and 2 Air Force officers. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the silence. They asked me to recount everything, from the first flicker of warning lights to the moment the wheels hit the ground. I spoke evenly, no heroics, no tremor in my voice. I told them what happened, not what they wanted to hear. When I reached the part about the AI malfunction, one of the officials interrupted. Do you have proof? I took off the silver pendant and set it on the table. It caught the light like a small confession. There's proof in here. They plugged it in. The screen behind them flickered, and a man's voice filled the room, shaky, tired, recorded years ago. Ms. Vivienne Monroe ordered us to push the deadline. I had to bypass the safety protocols. The words hung there, heavy and undeniable. The room went silent. Then, a door opened behind me. Footsteps. Vivienne walked in uninvited, wearing black again, as if grief were still her costume. She sat calmly in the back row. You can't be here, I said. She smiled faintly. I just came to watch you play the hero one last time. The committee chair ignored her and played another recording, the black box audio from the crash. Her voice filled the speakers, sharp and unmistakable. I'll sue the airline. I'm an investor. For the first time, I saw her face change. The calm cracked, color drained from her cheeks. One of the Air Force officers leaned forward. Ms. Monroe, because of your actions, over 300 people are alive, but we'll still have to review the legality of what you did. I looked straight at him. Authority is a privilege for the living. I only did what was needed to keep them that way. When it ended, the reporters outside were waiting. Flashes erupted as I stepped into the hallway. One voice rose above the noise. How does it feel to be questioned instead of celebrated? I looked directly into the nearest camera. The sky doesn't care who believes you. It only listens to those who know how to stay balanced. That night, a message from Helen lit my phone. The committee's opening a full investigation into Vivienne. Internal emails confirm she manipulated the 2018 report. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. Then, maybe now. Mom can finally rest. Outside. The city lights blurred in the glass. The storm in the air had passed, but the one below was just beginning. And I knew the next battle wouldn't be fought in the sky. It would be here, on the ground, where truth and blood finally meet. Rain drummed steady against the marble steps of the FAA building, turning Washington gray and gleaming. The lights inside burned white through the storm, sharp enough to make the place look holy. I climbed the steps slowly, in a pale blue shirt and black slacks, my hair pinned back. No makeup, no medals. I wanted nothing that could be mistaken for armor. Inside, the hum of cameras filled the air. Dozens of lenses pointed at me like loaded guns. Reporters whispered my name, their pens poised for blood. The hearing chamber was crowded, too bright, too still. At the front sat the tribunal, representatives from the Air Force, the Department of Transportation, and the FAA. On my left, Helen arranged her papers with quiet precision. On my right sat Vivienne, dressed for victory in a black suit with the silver emblem of AI Flight Systems pinned to her lapel. She leaned toward me, her perfume cutting through the smell of wet wool and coffee. "Don't be nervous," she murmured. "This isn't a battlefield. Everywhere has wind," I said, and faced the panel. The chairman spoke first, voice steady and formal. "Captain Callista Monroe, you are charged with unauthorized control of a civilian aircraft, violating Air Safety Act 1423. "Yes, sir," I answered. I took control when the pilots lost consciousness. I chose between a regulation and 300 lives. Pens scratched, shutters clicked. The hum of the cameras returned, relentless. Then Vivian stood. Her tone was gentle, almost maternal. She said she loved her sister, that she'd always tried to help me heal after Syria, that my trauma had never truly settled. She spoke as if she were delivering mercy, not poison. The murmurs in the room swelled. I breathed slowly, steadying the pulse in my throat. "Thank you for your concern, Vivian," I said evenly. "You've helped me plenty, especially when you falsified the 2018 drone report." Helen caught my cue. She stood, pressed a button on the tablet before her. The screen behind us flickered to life. A man's voice came through, ragged and guilty. "Ms. Vivienne Monroe requested we bypass the safety locks." I refused. But she said, "Callista won't dare report her own sister." Gasps rippled through the room. Vivienne went rigid. Her hands twitched at her sides, the mask finally cracking. "That's fabricated," she stammered. "Those files were altered." Helen's voice cut clean through hers. "The data bears internal serial codes verified through the Air Force server. It's authentic." Flashbulbs exploded. The tribunal chair glanced from Vivian to me, then spoke quietly. "Captain Monroe, do you have any further statement?" I looked out across the sea of faces. My reflection in the table glass was small, clear, unafraid. I didn't land that plane to prove a point. I landed it because 300 people believed they still had a future. That was enough authority for me. The chairman nodded. A murmur of approval swept the room. Then one of the Air Force officials rose, holding a folder. "There's another matter," he said. "Effective immediately. Vivian Monroe is under federal investigation for financial fraud and concealment of military technology defects." The color drained from her face. Her eyes met mine, not angry now, just hollow. "Mother gave you that chip, didn't she?" she whispered. "No?" I paused. She gave it to the one person who still believed truth should be seen. The silence that followed felt like gravity. Then, slowly, a few people began to clap. The sound spread, restrained but real. I didn't look back at her. I just gathered my papers and stood. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped. It came down warm and heavy, washing the marble steps clean. I crossed the courtyard, the flashes behind me fading into distance. In the back of a taxi, headlights sliding across the wet street. The radio crackled to life. Breaking news. Former Air Force pilot Callista Monroe has been cleared of all charges after today's FAA hearing. Her emergency actions aboard Flight 913 were deemed justified. I reached forward and turned it off. The silence that followed felt like breathing after years underwater. The driver glanced at me through the mirror. "Rough day?" I looked out the window at the rain tracing silver lines down the glass. "No," I said quietly. "Just a landing that finally counted." Outside, the storm softened to drizzle, the drops hitting the roof like applause I didn't need. The rain was warmer than tears, and for the first time, I let it fall. 2 months passed before the noise finally began to fade. Vivian vanished from every headline, every feed, every panel that used to praise her. Her company's shares were frozen. The board demanded her resignation. Official statements said she was undergoing treatment in Zurich. The world called it recovery. I called it exile. One morning, a plain envelope arrived from the FAA. Inside was a medal and a certificate stamped with government seal for heroic action resulting in the survival of 302 passengers. I held it for a moment, feeling its weight. then set it in a small wooden box and closed the lid. Some things were never meant for display. Helen called that afternoon, her voice half teasing, half proud. CNN wants an exclusive, she said. They'll fly you out, pay you well. No, I told her. I've said everything that needed to be said. The rest doesn't belong on camera. I sold the apartment in Anchorage a week later. The city had grown too quiet, too full of echoes. I packed what little I owned into my truck and drove south through Nevada. The mountains there looked scorched, their edges cut sharp against a sky so wide it almost dared you to measure it. The wind made a sound I hadn't heard since that night above the Rockies, a low, steady hum that felt familiar now, not threatening. It didn't scare me anymore. It sounded like continuation. I stopped at a gas station outside Tonopah to refill. The air was dry, the desert stretching endless on all sides. When I checked my phone, a message blinked across the screen from an unknown number. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you're still flying. No name. But I didn't need one. I stared at it for a long time, the heat shimmering off the hood of the truck, then deleted it without replying. There was no anger left, no pity either. Only distance, the kind that finally feels like peace. By dusk, I reached an abandoned stretch of land that used to be an Air Force testing range. The hangars were rusted, half buried in sand. I parked, stepped out, and stood in the silence. The horizon glowed gold and red, the air tasting of dust and jet fuel. That's where I built the sign. Monroe Flight Academy. It wasn't much, just a weathered hangar, 2 small classrooms, and a pair of old T-6 trainers salvaged from a scrapyard. But for the first time in years, it felt like something worth building, not to prove anything, just to begin again. Each morning, I stood out on the tarmac as the wind swept across the desert, carrying the smell of oil and sunlight. I'd close my eyes, listen, and think. The sky is quietest when no one's arguing about who owns it. One afternoon, a letter arrived in a plain white envelope. The handwriting was clumsy but steady, the ink slightly smudged. Dear Ms. Monroe, if you hadn't stood up that day, my daughter wouldn't be alive. She's 10 now. She says she wants to learn to fly, to be brave, like you. The paper blurred as I read it. I pressed it against my chest, feeling something loosen inside me. Something I hadn't realized I'd been holding onto since the crash. The need to be understood, to be justified. Maybe heroism wasn't about headlines or medals or tribunals. Maybe it was this, a life saved that went on to dream again. I folded the letter carefully, tucked it into the box beside the medal I'd never hang, and whispered into the quiet air. This is what honor feels like. Above me, the sky stretched clear and infinite. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel heavy, it just felt mine. A year later, the Nevada desert glowed gold beneath the setting sun. The air shimmered with heat, and the horizon stretched wide enough to make silence feel infinite. Out on the runway, my first group of trainees, young women with steady hands and fearless eyes, checked the flaps of their training planes. They reminded me of a version of myself I hadn't seen in years, eager, uncertain, and desperate to be trusted. Inside the hangar, I sat at my desk, signing off on flight logs and maintenance reports. The room smelled faintly of oil and dust. Just as I was finishing, a soft knock came at the door. When I looked up, a young woman stood there, brown hair pulled back, her face oddly familiar. "Are you Callista Monroe?" she asked. I nodded. Yes. She hesitated, then said quietly, "I'm Lily, Vivian's daughter." The air seemed to still between us. She stepped closer, her voice trembling just enough to betray the courage it took to come here. "Mom said I should find my own answers about the sky. If you'll let me, I'd like to learn to fly." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I looked past her, through the open door, to the runway, long sunlit, gleaming in the distance. The same path that had once saved me and nearly destroyed me. "If you're brave enough to take off," I said finally, "I'll teach you how to land." That evening, Lily climbed into the cockpit of the trainer plane. Her hands shook as she reached for the throttle, but her eyes were steady. I stood on the observation tower, the silver pendant warm in my hand, its surface worn smooth by time. The engine roared to life, scattering dust across the tarmac. As the plane lifted off, nose rising against the horizon, a voice echoed in my memory, the recording from the black box, my own voice from that night above the Rockies. "We're going to glide it in." I smiled. Revenge isn't the sound of an explosion or a crash. It's the quiet moment when you touch down and no longer need anyone's applause. I never needed to bring my sister down. I just needed to rise above her. Lily's plane descended perfectly, wheels kissing the runway with a whisper. The wind rolled through the desert, carrying nothing but calm. That evening, the sky said nothing, and for the first time, that silence felt like freedom.